Well, hello, and welcome back. If you're joining in from the live stream, please head on over to YouTube. The link is in the description if you want to be able to leave a comment or ask questions during the stream. And if you are not actually watching this live, then I might also suggest you check out the comments so that you can get the edited version there under the Beyond Code Bootcamp playlist. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Well, hello, and welcome back. What we're doing today is backing up the website, beautiful website that we just created with Git. So the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do, of course, is as always, go to gist.github.com so that you can open up your notes and add another article to your blog or what is becoming your blog there. And if at any point this is useful for you, you have that aha moment, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Now, here is our beautiful, wonderful blog that we have created, and we've added a style to it so it looks really nice. And if you remember, last time I truly accidentally, deleted the template.html while we were working on this. You've probably had a similar experience before where you've been working on a document, maybe some homework or a work report, accidentally deleted something and hit save, and oops, there it went, or deleted a file that you meant to keep, etc. So it's important to have backups. And for coders, the backup tool that we like to use is called Git. Now, if you are on Mac, every time that you do a major system update, it gets uninstalled and you have to reinstall it. The command for that is in the description, but I'll just show you real quick. It's called xcode select. That's kind of hard to read there, but it's xcode select space -- install. The command is kind of wrapping over because I've got too much text on the screen. And then on Linux, it is sudo apt get install -y git. Actually, just apt install. Sorry. Okay. So assuming that you've already installed it, and assuming that you are here with me in our code folder, I'm actually going to make my terminal a little bit smaller so I have a touch more space here. Command K to clear. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to back up our source files. We don't need to back up the HTML that we've generated because we can generate it at any time with our build script, but we do need to back up our source files. So what we're going to do is we're going to call Git Init, and let's see. Oh, this is something new. So it looks like we need to use Git Config. The very first time we ever run Git, this is a new version of Git that I had just installed, we need to run a command apparently to tell it what we want our default branch name to be. Now I'm going to use master because that's the traditional, that's what you're going to see in 99.99% of places. Some people are now calling it main, but we're just going to go with the traditional because that's what most tutorials are, and it is nice to have consistency. Okay, so apparently we need to do that now. That's new. So we're going to run Git Init, and what it's doing is it's creating a database. It's an actual real database inside of a folder, which is our Git folder, and .git folder. Sorry, so I did ls.git. And I'll show you if we want to do it out in long form. It'd be ls./ for current directory, .git/ because it's a directory. And we can see here's all the stuff inside of here. These are all the database files. There's a config file that we're actually going to use at some point. And then all of the rest of this stuff, there's config and hooks are things that we'll use. The rest of it is related to the database. Okay? So in order to use this, we first will do Git Status. So we did Git Init. That means it created the database in the directory where we are. Now we're going to do Git Status. And Git Status will show us which files are already in the database and saved and which files are not. So we can see none of our files or folders are in the database. So what I'm going to do is run Git Add, And I think most of these are actually in the description. Just going to double check. I think I actually forgot to do Git Status. That's okay, because we just talked about it now, but I'll update the description for that later. So Git Add, and then we give it the name of file that we want. So if you remember, typing is the leading cause of typos. So we are just going to type the letter T-E and then hit tab. That way we're not typing a lot, we're not causing typos, we're letting tab autocomplete for us. And then I hit enter. Now I have added template.html to the database, kind of, sort of. It's not yet fully saved, but it is marked as a file that we do want to keep track of. I guess that's the way to say it. When we do Git Add, we mark the file as a file that we want to keep track of, or a version of the file that we want to keep track of. So now if I run Git Status, we can see changes to be committed to the database is a new file. And I'm going to go ahead and do a Git Add on the source directory. And then we can do Git Status. And we can see it added every file that was in the source directory. Now, if you perhaps had some of our old files in there that are junk files, we don't want to commit the junk files into the directory. So what you can do is you can use Git Reset Src. And if we do a Git Status, we'll see that none of those files are there. So you could go ahead and remove any junk files that you have. Like maybe you have one of the built versions. Be careful though. Don't remove your block. Be very careful with this command, because we don't want to remove files that you've worked so hard on. But maybe you have an HTML version of a file that you want to remove. So you can do that. And you can also, we already talked about wildcards, so you can also use Git Add src / and then put star.md. And that will guarantee that you're only adding your markdown files. All right. Next, we probably also want to add our build script that we worked so hard. So I'm going to add that. We can actually add more than one file or directory at a time. So I'm just going to start listing them out here. We can add our GitHub Markdown. Technically, we can just re-download this, but I think this is the kind of thing where it's good for us to keep a copy. So let's say we're going to keep that. And we don't need to keep any of our index.html files. So when we have files that are, for example, generated that we know that we don't want to keep, there's a special file that we use called .git ignore. So I'm going to create one of those right now for these leftover files. Now, .dsstore, this is a system file for Mac. We definitely don't need to commit that. We don't want any of this garbage in our database. We want our database to be nice and clean. So we're going to create a file called .git ignore. And then we can list, using very similar patterns to what we have in Bash. In fact, some of them are even a little nicer. We can list files that we don't want to keep. So files that are in the current directory, I think we can do this with just a /. Typically, / refers to the top level directory. Obviously, we're many levels deep in our file system. But as far as the database is concerned, where we're at right now is the top level of the database. So we put a / and then we can put star.html. It means it's not going to save any of the HTML files that are at the top level of the database. Now there's an exception to that because we want to save our template.html. So we'll deal with that in just a second, because there is a way to say, okay, just kidding, there's one thing that we do want to include. We can use a bang, which in this case means reverse, and then put template.html. So we're going to ignore any of the built HTML files, but we're not going to ignore our template.html. And then we also want to ignore that ds store, which is a system file. I'm also going to put one other thing in here, which is we want to ignore Vim swap files and other types of temporary files. So I'm going to put in here star.temp. I'm going to put in here ~star, and I'm going to put in here .star .sw star. So these are ignore. Oh, and by the way, we can have comments in this file. So if we start a line with a pound or a hash, that is a comment. So we're going to say ignore vim temp files, ignore other temp files, ignore Mac system files, and then this stuff up here is a little bit more directly what we're working with. So we just want to ignore temporary files and the built HTML files. I'll put a comment here too. Ignore built HTML files, but not our template. Now in the future, we might have to go back and edit that because there may be another file that we want to add that's an HTML file up at the top level that we don't want to commit to the repository. In any case, now that I have created my Git Ignore file, if I do Git Status again, you'll notice that all of those files that were there before are being ignored. So the database is saying, I'm not saying that this file needs to be added. I'm just pretending like it's not there at all. But then we do need to add our .git ignore. So now we have all the files that we want to add to our database for what is essentially the first revision. So at this point, after we've added everything, we do a git commit. So I'm going to do git commit -m. This means message. Every commit gets a message, and typically you want to use something descriptive. The very first commit, almost always, just as a common convention, we call it initial commit. So there we go, initial commit. And then we do git push. Whoops, sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. We don't do git push, completely forget that I said that. We'll talk about that in a later video. Sorry. Okay, so now when I do git status, look what it says. Nothing to commit, working tree clean. And what it means by tree is our file system tree. So if I were to do the tree command, this is our file system tree. We can see, of course, it's not ignoring anything. So we can see all of the files that we're ignoring, like the DS store, the Git folder, which is the database. And then it's got a bunch of stuff in there, and that only grows longer and longer and longer. Basically, what you'll see in here is it has a copy of every version of the file, and the copy is this big long hash. So instead of being referenced by the file name, it's referenced by the hash. And then there's a special database file that basically maps everything. It says this file v1 is this hash, this file v2 is this hash, so on and so forth. So we're not going to go deep into that yet, or probably ever. We will talk about the versioning, but anyway, let's go on. And then it has, we can see all of our files. We can see the HTML files there. This is our tree. This is the tree of the current directory. Okay, so let me go ahead and clean that up again. And now let's say that I accidentally delete all the HTML, or I delete all the HTML files. And then I realize, oh no, I deleted my template.html. I needed that. I can do a git status, and we can see, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller again so that everything can fit on a single line. Typically a terminal is assumed to be 80 lines long, and I had mine set to 70 so that it could be nice and big. But in order for it to not be cluttered and be easier to read them, taking it down so that we can fit more stuff on the screen. Anyway, so you can see it says deleted. And what we can do is type git checkout template.html. Or apparently there's a new command in this new version of Git restore. I'm pretty sure that wasn't there last week. Anyway, when we do, and I actually did the checkout a little bit wrong. This would be the correct way to do it. You do a git checkout, And then if you're going to check out a file, you put dash dash and then the file name. It happens to work much of the time without the dash dash, but it's a good habit to be in to always put the dash dash there, which we'll talk about later. So in any case, I did a checkout. So basically I said, the version that you had saved, give me a copy from the database and put it back in the directory. So now if we do a git status, we can see that it is clean, meaning that there's nothing deleted and there's nothing updated. And if we do a list here, we can see that template.html is there. So let's do two things. One, let's update our template.html. Let's put, I don't know what we should do to change here. Here's just a little thing we can do. And we'll talk about this later when we talk more about web pages, but we'll put a title in the page. So I'm going to call this AJ's blog, and I'm going to save that. So that goes in the head section. And technically, so should these. These were actually in the wrong section. Okay, this is perfect. And technically, this is in the wrong section as well. All of that should have been in the head. Meh. Go ahead and add it there. Okay, this is absolutely perfect. So now, if I do a git status, I can see it says that template.html was modified. So I'm going to go ahead and do a git add, which is saying, hey, this is a file. This is a new version of the file I want to keep track of. Before, it wasn't keeping track of it. If I deleted it in that state while it was red, then it would be gone. I could check out a version from the database that's been committed, but I wouldn't be able to fix that I accidentally deleted it. Here, if I accidentally delete template.html and I do a git status, we can see that there are two copies of the file right now. There is, well, not really a copy, but there's the deleted version, and then there is the version that I told it to keep track of, but I hadn't told it to save as a new version yet. So I can still use checkout on this. I can do git checkout -- template.html. And now the version that I told it to keep track of, it's not committed to the database permanently, but it was able to restore the version that I accidentally deleted. So at this point, I want to save it again. I'm going to do git commit -m for message. And the message that I'm going to give about this version of the file is move, let's see, add title, move head things to head. Okay, hit enter. And now let's say that I want to, this last thing we'll do here, and then we'll wrap this up. I'm going to go into my source directory, and I'm going to create a new blog article. And let's say that this one is how to use Git. That's what I'm going to name it. And I'm going to go in here, and let's go ahead and we'll use a heading. How to use Git. And I'm just going to make some quick notes to myself. I'm going to put a bash code block. So that's triple backticks and then bash. And then I'm just going to list out all the things that we've done. Git Init. Create a new Git database. I'm not going to make comments for all of these just for the sake of time. Git Status, Git Add, and then path to, let's see, file path. There we go. That's what I'm going to call that. Filepath.ext. So I'm just using this. It's common to use the angle bracket syntax when you're making notes to mean something that must be there but should be replaced. So the file is not called filepath.ext. We're supposed to put something else there. So that's a common convention. And then we talked about git commit -m. And then your message here. Another common convention is that when there's a string that's supposed to be replaced, the reader is supposed to know the string gets replaced. It goes in all caps. And then one thing that we didn't, well, we also talked about git checkout -- file path.ext, which was for either taking a copy out of the database or the most recent version we told it to keep track of. And then we also had use.git ignore to list files to not track. And I'm just going to put, this is basically a txt file. And we had stuff like star.html. Oops, ignore all HTML files. But don't ignore template.html in the root. Whoops. There we go. So we've got that. That's a good set of notes, good blog article for us to have. Now let's go ahead and do Git Status. And we can see that there's a new file that's not being tracked. We can add it. And then we can do Git Status again. And we can see there's a new file that's going to be committed. And we can do Git Commit, add article on Git. There we go. And now we're clean again. Now, a backup isn't truly a backup unless it's stored in more than one place. And we will go over that either next time or the time after that. But for now, let's go ahead and build our blog again. So I'm going to run bash build.sh. And then we will rsync our blog back over to the web server. I'm going to go ahead and let that happen. And now if I refresh, look, I've got a new blog article, how to use Git. Right there. Huzzah. All right. If that was useful for you, go ahead and give it a like. If you want, you can subscribe either to this, well, the live channel if you're watching this live, or the Beyond Code Bootcamp channel if you're watching it edited. Go ahead and hit the bell if you want to make sure to get every one. And please let me know in the comments what about this was helpful. Include a time code if you can. What about this wasn't helpful or was confusing or wasn't easy to understand? I'd love to know how to improve in the future. And also, I want to know, what other questions do you have about Git or about what we can do with our blog? I look forward to reading the comments, and I will catch you later. Adios.